trying to stop them from building it. And it seems to me that the media is kind of promoting it. And even though I think anyone can easily understand why this is a sensitive issue, well, the Constitution says that the government will make laws that hold a neutral standpoint on religion. And, I mean, I don't understand how that can happen. I'm kind of in favor of, like, the mosque being built. And you might disagree with that, and that's fine. I was just kind of wondering what your guys' opinions are on that.
My take's really simple. If they allow any religious organizations to build buildings there, then they have to allow all of them. And if
that's what I was.
And if they're going to prohibit one, then they got to prohibit all of them.
Now, if you're what you're talking about the American news media being biased, and I think actually the word you were looking for in this particular instance is sensationalist. Yes, absolutely, it's a travesty. Yeah. Our journalism has completely gone down the toilet. It's a worldwide shame. And the people in other countries, I mean, I talk to international people all the time who reflect that if you want to know what's really going on in America, you watch news in another country.
Yeah,
they know more about our history than we do as well.
The news station that won the coverage for the best coverage on the American war was the BBC.
Yep.
Bingo.
All right. Well, thanks a lot, Jeremy.
Okay, thank you.
Appreciate it. Yeah, the sad thing is that, you know, if I'm honest, I'm as guilty of perpetuating the problem as anybody. Because the reason that story was titled, you know, Woman Stops Robbery with Faith is because that's what sells. It not only gets the faith heads to buy the paper, but it gets us riled up and talking about it.
Yeah.
Because, so they're just being, you know, that's how you make money. If they'd have written the headline that I suggested, Compassionate Woman Stops Robbery with a Lie, probably wouldn't have got much press at all. I mean, you have to manufacture a story. And it would be nice if there were more. There are plenty of journalists with integrity, and there are plenty that find stories that don't have to be manufactured. But the general public, including I'm no exception, dig on some sensationalism.
Yeah.
And
I've been interviewed on the TV news a number of times, and every time that the news has covered some event of my life, they've gotten the details wrong. Every time.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, journalism is at least inaccurate. But then when it goes to as you said, to sensationalizing, gets into the whole Fox News thing where they're just, you know, it becomes a show. And you can't rely anymore on what you're seeing because you're not getting an account of what's really going on. You're getting opinions of what's going on. And to a degree, that's fine as long as you can get a counter opinion to weigh against that and make your own mind. Now, enough said about that.
All right, real quick, we've got in San Antonio, is it Samer?
Hello?
Yeah, can you give me your name again? I'm not sure this is right.
Samer?
Samer?
Yeah.
Okay. How you doing?
I'm doing good. Well, actually, I'm an ex-Muslim. I consider myself now as an agnostic, but leaning towards atheism. Anyway, I actually had a couple of debates with some theists, especially in the physics field. Well, they claim that God existence was not proved, but, I mean, supported by one of the most brilliant physicists in history, which is Isaac Newton. So since Isaac Newton had written lots of books and articles about religion, well, that would pretty much support their claim. And I actually have no explanation. I know he was raised in a religious family, Newton, but he didn't even become an agnostic. He was a strong believer, theologian.
Yeah, Newton was batshit crazy about a few things, actually.
So, do you have an explanation about this? Why?
Into alchemy type stuff at a time, I actually had that wrong. In any case, your friends are wrong. The fact that Newton believed in God doesn't add any more credibility to the God claim than anybody else who's ever believed in God. It's an appeal to an authority, and a fallacious one, because Newton hasn't demonstrated any expertise on the God subject. And with regard to his belief in God, I think he was wrong.
Yeah. Well, don't you think that he looked at it from a scientific point of view?
No. He didn't look at God from a scientific point of view. But then, in his time, they didn't evaluate things in terms of natural versus supernatural. Okay, and they just assumed, as they'd been taught, that everything that happened, regardless what it was part of God's way. So whatever they found would be something that had to be something that God did. The motions of the universe, for example, when they started challenging the movements of the planets and geocentricity, for example, when they started realizing that the universe does not rotate around the Earth, and still many people still believe that it does, but when they started challenging in that, I mean, they weren't yet. The scientists at that time were not worshiping Scripture, even if they were worshiping God. There was a distinction. The Bible was written by men. The world was written by God. That means the Bible could be wrong, and God still exists. What you get with the modern creation movement is where they can't distinguish between the two, where doctrine and deity are one, and they cannot accept that God could exist if the Bible is wrong. The Bible, in a sense, has become God.
Right. Yeah.
In a sense, Newton did kind of what a previous caller had done, because in Principia Mathematica, I think it was, he writes that mathematics is the language with which God has created the universe. So Newton looked around at the world, begins with an assumption that there is in fact a God that is governing and controlling everything, and so everywhere he looks and sees order, he defines it and understands it scientifically, but ultimately attributes it back to this God, which is Newton's science was better than the previous caller, but the leap from this level to the God thing is just as unsubstantiated on behalf of both of them. So even if that individual that had called earlier had been a brilliant scientist, it wouldn't have lent any credibility at all, because you can't get from this is what we observe and what we can detect and measure scientifically to it's that way because of this God thing. And so on that subject, Newton was in error. And there's plenty of other people there are brilliant thinkers who I admire who are in error on
one of the
God issue.
One of the questions that could never have occurred to Newton would be to test whether or not there was a divine influence. I mean, you have to remember that the church ran everything. So if you did have an idea that you wanted to question religion, there were laws in effect in the land at that time that would prohibit you from expressing those ideas. They controlled everything. You could not publish any idea that argued against the church's position, whatever they said that it was at the time. So, but it wouldn't have occurred to him under most circumstances anyway. Everything that they see, everything in the natural order would have been designed by God. No one questioned that. No one in his circle of friends questioned that. It might never have crossed his mind that he should question that.
It is, by the way, an incredibly dishonest argument. This is raised a lot of times by apologists that'll say, well, and they'll misrepresent Einstein and others, but they'll rattle off a bunch of smart people and say, well, Newton and Einstein and so and so and so and so and so and so, they all believed in God. And the intent there is to make you go, well, I'm not nearly as clever as those guys, and if they believed in God, maybe I'm wrong. And that's an incredibly dishonest thing, to which I'll answer, okay, on the subject of God, I am smarter than Newton and Einstein and everybody. You're not going to make me feel like I'm less than because you've made a fallacious appeal to authority. I can't stand dishonest argument like that. Does that mean I think I'm better than or smarter than across the board? Absolutely not. But I think those guys got it wrong in that area. And until somebody demonstrates with evidence that I'm actually wrong on this, and there is some God. And by the way, if that were to happen, if somebody were to today provide scientific evidence that validates that in fact there is a God, I would change my mind based on the evidence, and I would still point out that all of those people who believed it before were unjustified in their belief, because the evidence for their belief did not exist back then. If they got it right, it's happenstance. It's a fluke.
I agree with you. Yeah.
Yeah. Congratulations on your being able to break out of the mold that you were born into as well. Yes, it requires the free thinking that it takes to reject what everyone in your family and everyone in your culture is totally convinced about. If you're able to break free of that, regardless of how immersed in it you are, then you have to understand that when they use an argument like that,